Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're out the range. It's bitter cold outside and extremely windy. We're almost to spring, so we'll be shooting outside here very soon, just not today. But today I want to talk about a very cool new firearm from H&R. You've probably seen me make a few videos about various H&R firearms. This is the one we're going to talk about today, the DOE 9mm. But before we start talking about it, we're just going to start off the video with an old original Colt. And Colt would make a few different models of 9mm AR-15s or submachine guns, commonly referred to as pistol caliber carbines these days, or PCCs. And this would be an example of an early Colt 9mm. Now, this is going to differ from the DOE gun, and we'll talk a little bit about the differences. But, you know, there was the 635 Colt and then the 633. And the 633 Colt would be this DOE purpose-built 9mm submachine gun, but this is a semi-automatic pistol. And it would be used by the Department of Energy, and we'll get into a little bit about its use and why the DOE or the Department of Energy would need a 9mm submachine gun. And it's just kind of a cool video, a very cool piece of history. Currently available. These things are now out there. I talked about them at SHOT Show, but they're actually shipping those things right now. And we're going to delve into it and have a lot of fun with the new H&R DOE 9mm pistol.
A lot of folks ask me, how can I get involved in the firearms business in that particular community? And one of the best ways to do that is to become a gunsmith. Every gunsmith I know is just overbooked with work. It's a very good living. And so if you would like to become a gunsmith, you need to go to a gunsmithing school or become an apprentice for an existing gunsmith. But Modern Gun School is an accredited college that also works with veterans in the GI Bill, where you can go and get a degree from accredited college in gunsmithing and then go out and start your own gunsmithing business, which I think is a really great option. Again, throughout my entire life, gunsmiths have always been able to earn a really good living, assuming they have a really strong work ethic. So please check out Modern Gun School. I do have a link in the video description below.
So let's talk about the 9mm Colt. So by the 1970s, Colt had pretty much done everything with the AR-15 M16. They had made belt-fed versions, 9mm submachine guns, of course the 5.56. They had done all sorts of cool stuff. They even had, by the late 70s, early 80s, open bolt, light machine gun versions of the M16 I've had the opportunity to play with. So Colt did a lot of cool stuff, and this is an early Colt 9mm AR-15. And when you take a look at this, you're going to notice that, first of all, it has that classic gray finish to it. It'll have a 2-position stock, not a multi-position stock on it. And it has an A2 grip on it, but you'll notice from this early ejection port, this is a full 5.56 length ejection port. Later 9mm versions would have a little port blocker right here, which you'll see on the DOE gun. And then, you know, pretty much like car style, Colt Commando style handguards out here. And of course, 9mm. Now on top, I have the single point red dot sight. This thing would be known for being used as one of the early red dot optics in Vietnam on the Sante Raid. And this is why this is on here. It's a classic red dot sight that would be kind of period correct for this particular gun. And we'll talk a little bit about this style of sight because I have another version of this on the DOE gun that is from a different company but uses the same technology conceptually. So this would be the early 9mm Colts. These things operate just like a 5.56. You'll notice it's a standard 5.56 upper and lower. You'll notice there are holes here, and this will become important when we talk about the DOE gun. There are holes here in the lower receiver. These roll pins hold in a block that slides into the mag well, and they pin it in, and this block accepts the 9mm Colt magazines, which are really just Uzi mags with a different cut in them to be able to interface with the mag release on these guns. So this is the original Colt. Now let's take a look at the DOE pistol that I have here. Again, this is from H&R, and this would be an evolutionary step from this. This was intended to meet a government contract for the Department of Energy, and of course they did some really, really cool stuff with it that we'll delve into with this video in the next segment. So let's get started and taking a closer look at this bad boy, the DOE 9mm. All right, so the DOE gun, why would the Department of Energy need a 9mm submachine gun? Glad you asked that question. So right after the Cold War, obviously we were the first nation to develop nuclear weapons. and nuclear energy. Everything, a lot of stuff came out of the Manhattan Project, not just nuclear weapons, but nuclear energy in general. And so a bunch of different agencies were created to kind of deal with all the different variations of nuclear energy and nuclear power, from weapons to electrical generation to policies on how to deal with all this stuff. So we had all these different agencies, I should say, out there. And then in 1977, or right around that time period, the Department of Energy was created to bring all these different agencies together to regulate and manage our nation's nuclear assets under one bureaucracy or one agency. And that would be the DOE. And so a lot of folks will make the mistake of thinking the Department of Energy only deals with nuclear power plants. No, they also deal with nuclear weapons. And so when it comes to managing and working with those weapon systems, the DOE, for example, when a new weapon would be created, they would then transport it to whatever military base that it would be stationed at. And it would be the Department of Energy and U.S. Marshals and some other folks that could get involved in this, but they would transport it and then they would hand that asset off to the military. Military personnel would take charge of it, and then it would go into military service. And so it was during those transportation operations and stuff, you would see these weapons. I've seen them out there in the 1980s. I ran into DOE people and U.S. Marshals with these weapons. And so it was common for them to have this and all sorts of cool stuff, like really cool guy stuff from the 1980s. They were tasked with pretty serious work. At one point, the United States would fly nuclear weapons from point to point. And that got banned because our nation has lost up to 6 that we know of nuclear weapons. Some of them right here in the continental United States because they were dumped from aircraft that were having emergency landings, or aircraft just crashed and had nukes on them. And we've lost them. We don't even know where those weapons are. And so they stopped flying them around. Then they started moving them by rail. But when you're moving a weapon from a manufacturing facility to a military base, and there's one railroad coming into that base, well, it's kind of obvious where that nuke's coming from, and protesters could camp out on the railroad tracks and cause problems. And many got hurt during that era. So they stopped that. Then they started moving them over the road. Now, if you jump on the DOE's website today, they will actually have a big picture of, vehicles that are moving nuclear material. I don't know what materials, but moving nuclear materials over American highways. And the DOE still performs security for those jobs. So yes, the DOE did have a need for 9mm submachine guns. So let's take a closer look at this guy, talk about some of the features of it. And I would say this thing is, if I had to give it a number, 90% correct, right? First of all, H&R didn't make these. H&R did make M16s during Vietnam, but by the time this thing would be developed, it was Colt making them for the U.S. military. But H&R is a great name, and they do have a history of making M16s. So having this as an H&R, I think, is kind of cool. But anyway, so let's take a closer look. Let's break this thing down, talk about it from the buttstock all the way to the barrel, all the features of it, and talk about where some of the discrepancies are in this clone build. But again, about 90% there, and I think they did a great job. If they went any further, it would just raise the price of the firearm, and that's something that PSA is always concerned with, quality and measuring that quality against the cost. So they always take cost into consideration, where a lot of other companies would just build a perfect clone and sell it for $3,000. PSA takes a different tact, and so price is definitely a concern of theirs. So I think at 90%, it's pretty darn close. Let's take a closer look and go over this thing from the rear end all the way to the front. Alrighty, so starting off back here at the rear, we have a brace. Again, this is a pistol. Now, this does look like a stock cosmetically, but if you take a look at it from the rear, it's clear that this is a brace and has a very narrow footprint here, so it would dig into your shoulder if you were trying to shoulder it or whatever. So, a braced pistol. Now, this has 6 positions, so we'll just go ahead and take this off. You can see we have 6 positions on the buffer tube here. Well, the original would have 2 positions, just like the Colt that I opened up the video with. So that would be a step in the modernization direction and away from the original design. But this is a standard buffer tube back here, and all this would be correct. If you really wanted to make it a 2-position buffer tube, they exist out there. You could swap that out yourself. Okay, they're just using their existing inventory of buffer tubes to reduce cost, which makes perfect sense to me. Now, moving up here, this is what's kind of interesting about the DOE gun. So you'll notice that it has an A1 upper, right? A fixed carrying handle with A1 sights on it. So anyway, yeah, they got the pistol grip, A2, as I've already pointed out. That would be correct for the period. This early Colt has what we know as an A2 grip on it. So Colt was in the process of transitioning to that before the actual A2 actually came out. And When you come up here, we have the fencing here, which you don't have on the Colt because that's a semi-auto civilian model, but this would be correct with the fencing. Here we have what most folks would call a port buffer, but this is actually a gas blocker, right? So if you take a look at the earlier Colt, as I pointed out, it has a full-size ejection port here that would accommodate 5.56. This has this block in here, and then a little half-sized port cover. And why did they do that? Well, suppressing these wasn't really a thing back then, but this is intended so when you're firing it, this is intended to keep gas and debris from coming back out of the ejection port and hitting the shooter in the face. These little 9mm Colts have a tendency, in my experience shooting the earlier guns, to eject unburnt powder, particulate, maybe brass shavings from the case, things like that, come flying out of the ejection port and can hit the operator in the face. And this was intended to keep that from happening. It's flat-faced over here and not really a port buffer intended for directing cases forward. That wasn't what they were trying to do here. But that is correct. That would be on the DOE gun. And this is correct too with the little half-sized port cover. Now on the A1 carrying handles, it would be normal to have a hole through there. And on top I have an Armisen OEG, which is an occluded gun sight and occluded eye gun sight. And you can't see through this. When you look through here, if you close one eye, you're going to see black with a red dot in the center of it. It's meant to be used with both eyes open. This would be an early red dot sight. And these have a little tritium filament in here, so it's a light gathering capability, but also it will have a tritium filament, so it will work in low light. And of course, we have our adjustments out here. It's just a solid aluminum tube, very durable, and this would be period correct for this type of a firearm, right? This gun would have come around in the 1980s, and so these were still in common use. I had them in high school, these OEGs, and so that would be correct on here. Moving forward, we have our slip ring here. You'll notice it has a taper to it. And again, this would be known as an A2 slip ring, but it was correct for this particular firearm. And interestingly enough, on this early Colt 9mm, you'll see it doesn't have the flat slip ring of the A1 or the M16. It has the A2 style, just like the DOE gun. So that is correct. A2 grip and what we come to call an A2 slip ring. All right. Then moving out here, we have the handguards. Now, I've read that the early handguards were basically repurposed port firing weapon handguards that you would find during the Cold War, like the Bradley fighting vehicle. They'd have M16s. Handguards looked very similar to this. And then the end of the barrel would be threaded, and they could thread it in, and then they could fire out little gun ports on armored personnel carriers. Then out here, we have a little piece of sheet metal that is intended to keep you from putting your hand out in front of the muzzle. So it's a hand stop, if you will. And then out here on the end, on the original DOE gun, just a little bit of the barrel would have stuck out. But on, I think this thing's really, really tight on there. It is. But on this particular gun, they've threaded it 1/2x28, and then they have a knurled thread protector on here. Now, if you want to go for a more classic look, you can get a non-knurled thread protector and screw that on there and look more like the end of a barrel and cover up those threads if that's something that bothers you. But that would not be correct for this gun. And then we have this little detent front sight that folds, and this is correct. And the front sight is a standard AR-15 style front sight with protective ears, and this is adjustable for elevation. And then back here on the rear, we have the two different apertures, which is pretty standard, and the rear sight is adjustable for windage, so you can zero it, or you can do as I did and put an OEG on there. So now let's take the gun apart. I'll show you what the handguards look like here. Handguards do have the heat shielding in them. And you can see the little 7-inch barrel. It's kind of a heavy profile barrel. But we'll take the gun apart and take a look on the inside, because there's some differences on the inside too from the Colt variants and on the bolt itself. So let's take a look at that in the next segment. And then, of course, we want to shoot this thing and have some fun with it. So I know what you're asking yourself right now. Does it take Glock mags? No, it takes Uzi magazines or Colt mags. How does it 80s hip fire, given it's an 80s firearm? Well, glad you asked. So now let's take the gun apart and look on the inside. Remove the magazine. And this is something else. I kind of touched upon it earlier in the video, but let me reiterate. Another one of the big variances between this DOE gun and early Colts. The DOE guns will have the holes in the receiver and a pinned block inside the mag well. This has been machined from the factory to accept Colt magazines. There's no pins in it. So if you wanted to have that look, you could drill holes in here and just pound some roll pins in there and make it look even more authentic if you wanted to. But I did want to point that out. All right, so weapon is clear. Disassembles just like a standard AR-15. Hinge it open. Take out your bolt, your T-handle. You can unpin the upper from the lower. And here you can see inside of the gun, this is your ejector, your feed ramp, and then here's your bolt stop. Standard AR-15 fire control. Here's your buffer. Get out of there. Recoil spring. And then, of course, you can take off the brace if you want to and strip it down. All right, so there you go. Now, one thing I do want to point out, it's a little bit different here, the bolt. Let me pull the bolt out of the Colt. Colt bolt. Another difference. This is an actual 9mm Colt bolt, and this is a new style bolt. So what you're going to notice is that on this, the extractor is inside of the bolt itself. On this, there's a deep cut right here, and this is your much larger extractor on this. So this is an improved bolt. All right. They both have their weights back there. That's pretty normal. So you can see the differences in the cuts. Now here's what's a little bit depressing. So I did find original Colt bolts like this and try to, in an effort to make my DOE gun look a little bit more correct, I wanted to put one of these bolts in the gun so it would have that look, right? Like that. The problem is that this bolt will not work in this gun. I'll just go ahead and show you guys. Probably get it to work with some modification. Go ahead and put my recoil spring and stuff back in here. T-handle. The problem you're going to run into is the bottom of this bolt's going to run into bits and pieces on the front of the receiver, and it's going to stop just shy of going completely closed, so I can't get that rear pin across. So if I pull that down as hard as I can, you'll see that I can't get it to go across, right? If you put its regular bolt in there, she'll close right up. So sadly, this without modification to the gun or to the bolt is not going to work in this gun. But that's only for folks that are really, really interested in trying to make a 100% accurate clone copy. Now, I did talk about the magazines. So this is an aftermarket magazine. This is one of the magazines that will come with the DOE gun. And these mags are nothing more than Uzi mags. So if you buy Uzi mags, you can notch them and make them work in the Colts. A lot of people did that, especially back during the ban era, 94 to 2004. But yeah, and you'll find magazines out there. They'll have both the Colt cut and the Uzi cut, which would be a slot down here because the Uzi has a clip in the bottom of the pistol grip that holds the mag in. So you will find magazines that will work in both guns. But affordable, readily available, multiple different companies make them. So now I would love to tell you what the price is and stuff, but YouTube likes to accuse me of trying to sell you guns. That's not what we do here. We review firearms. So if you want to find out more about the information in terms of price and availability, stuff like that, you're just going to have to go out and find that information yourself, because if I give it to you, they'll strike my video or potentially pull my video, demonetize it, whatever. They have multiple different ways to punish me for not trying to sell you a gun, but accusing me of it. So just go out there. I will say that these are affordable in the grand scheme of things. For a clone, you'll know that some clones can get really pricey. This is going to be, right around $1,000. Not going to give you the actual price. So the price on these is going to be a little bit more attractive than perhaps some of the other clone guns that are out there. And of course, other companies have cloned the DOE in the past, and the prices on those early clones will vary as well. But anyway, so the overall fit and finish of this thing is really, really nice. The black anodization is nice and even. You will notice with parkerization, even with the old Colts, you might have slight tonal differences between the uppers and lowers. With the black anodization, typically things look pretty darn close. And so that looks really sharp on here. All the parts fit as they should. The gun's been 100% reliable with federal 115 grain and 124 grain ammunition. And yeah, I mean, it's just a pure pleasure to shoot. Both Jason and I really enjoy shooting this thing. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed taking a closer look at the H&R DOE 633 Colt replica that's currently available. When I first learned of this thing, I was so excited. This comes from my youth. This is a gun that I was familiar with in the 1980s, and it's something that when I found out they were going to make a clone of it, I absolutely had to have it. I saw it at SHOT Show, talked to the guys there, and they said, yep, they'll be shipping by the time you get back home. I got home within a week or two. I had the gun. I've been shooting it, having a great time with it, and I absolutely love it. The clone stuff is something that's near and dear to me. You know that I've been big into the clone market. I've been doing, videos talking about the old Brownells AR-10s and some of the AR-15s they did. Of course, the new H&Rs I've done videos on. I'm big into this clone thing. And this is definitely one of those itches that I was really happy to scratch when this came out. If you guys have any questions about the DOE 9mm, please ask those questions down below. I do try to stick around for the first couple of days after a video goes live to answer any questions you guys may have. Also, if you'd like to support us here on the Military Arms channel so we can continue to bring you content like this, please consider becoming part of our Patreon family. There's a link in the video description below. Also, right here on YouTube, you got the thanks and subscribe button underneath the video player you're watching right now. Hit either one of those buttons. You can help support us right here on YouTube in the age of demonetization. Thank you for 17 years of support. Swing by, check out Copper Custom, and we'll talk to you guys soon.